When you think of the serious injuries he's had in his life, he's fortunate they weren't worse than they were. The stabbing could have been the end for him. A chipped piece of bone from either of the two eye socket injuries could have blinded him. I don't know anybody in boxing who has had both eye sockets broken. What's worrying is that Golovkin is a hard puncher, and maybe it's not perhaps that surprising what damage he did. But Spence is not a single heavy puncher. He doesn't do it with one punch. It's more pressure, yet he broke Kell's socket. Does this suggest there is some kind of bone weakness? I say he's been lucky that he hasn't had worse injuries, and I think he should retire because that luck has got to run out. I'm pretty sure his parents and his partner and others in his family are going to say, right, you have had a great career, you've been world champion, you've done it. He's earned a ridiculous amount of money and is set for life. There are loads of things he could do, but he's stubborn and I don't think he will retire. I can see him coming back at light middleweight or middleweight. Once he's dealt with the damage there, then he'll have that decision to make, whether he is willing to risk it all again. He's going to have to wait until the eye is healed and see whether he thinks it's worth continuing. But the longer he leaves it, the harder it will be. After the operation, he is going to be sat on his hands for months. Those are the words of former world champion Junior Witter. He's also a stablemate of Kell Brook, and he was talking about, obviously, as you heard, Kell Brook there, suggesting that Kell Brook should retire. What do you think of this? Now, I have to say one thing about what Junior Witter is saying here with his comments. Witter and Kell Brook did used to have a little bit of tension between them. That's quite well documented. They're from the same gym, yes, but they weren't always seeing eye to eye in the gym. I don't know what this relationship is like now. Apparently they're friends. Who knows? If you're from Sheffield, if you have knowledge of the situation between Witter and Brook, are they really tight now? Are they good? Or is there still kind of a bit of residual tension? I don't know. If there is, then perhaps we should take what Junior Witter is saying here with a pinch of salt. But he's advising Kell Brook to retire. He says it's very unusual for somebody to have two broken eye sockets, and it certainly is unusual. Very unusual. Is it a case of Brook being so tight at the weight that it's even weakening his bones? Who knows? Maybe he's just fragile around the eye area. You know, people have different bone structures and whatnot. Maybe he's just delicate around the eye area in terms of his bones. Who knows? Whatever the case may be, do you agree with Junior Witter's advice that Kell Brook should retire? Do you think he's been lucky to get away with the damage that he's got away with so far? Or maybe you think he's actually unlucky? What do you think, people? And do you think he will retire? Do you think the best bet is for him to move up to light middleweight? I personally think light middleweight will be even more difficult for Kell Brook than welterweight. I think he's better off staying at welterweight, to be honest with you. Yes, he lost to Errol Spence, but I think he lost to Errol Spence because Errol Spence is that good. I think if you put him in there with Amir Khan, Pacquiao, a lot of other guys, he'll do better against them than he did against Spence, if he can recreate his old form. If he's on the way down, if he's on the slide, then maybe not. I mean, you look at Kell Brook and you look at his career so far, he hasn't really done that much. Relatively speaking, compared to other world-class fighters, he hasn't done that much. He's been in two big fights, really. I mean, the Sean Porter fight obviously was a big fight because it was his first world title fight. It was away from home. He won that fight. Then he had a bunch of nondescript title defenses. Then he had this fight with Errol Spence, which was another big fight, which he lost. Other than that, there isn't really much there for Kell Brook. He had a fairly short run as world champion. And this is something I have to touch on as well, because a lot of people were saying that Eddie Hearn, when I did the Eddie Hearn, the video about Eddie Hearn supposedly ruining, quote unquote, Kell Brook's career, they were saying, well, Eddie Hearn didn't give Kell Brook enough options. You know, he didn't do a good enough job at promoting Kell Brook, and that's why Brook was having to take the Golovkin fight to make decent money rather than taking on Jesse Vargas. Well, if you remember, Kell Brook pulled out of several fights. Can we blame all that on Eddie Hearn? He pulled out of the Diego Chavez fight. Before that, he was supposed to fight Brandon Rios. He pulled out of the Diego Chavez fight. He pulled out of the Devon Alexander fight several times. He pulled out of, God knows what other fights I've forgotten off the top of my head. That plays a part in why Kell Brook didn't get as big as he might have been, because of all the pullouts. Losing the trust of the fans. You can't just blame it all on Eddie Hearn as to why he wasn't in a position to earn millions and millions by the time he fought Golovkin. Prior to fighting Golovkin. So anyway, yeah, just had to interject that in there. But what do you think of what Junior Witter has said here, people? Should Kell Brook retire? Should he try and achieve more? Do you disagree with me? Maybe you think he can achieve more at light middleweight. Maybe you don't rate the light middleweights that much. Me personally, I think his advantage is at welterweight. The light middleweight guys out there, the Erislandy Laras, the Charlos, etc. I think these guys, Andrades, I think these guys are too much for Kell Brook.